Now breathe. What? It's labor pains. And it's really stretching the American working class's perineum to the limits. We're cranking out a kid, folks. One newborn political party for all us working class schleps who aren't otherwise represented in America's socio-political economic system. But before we get to an episiotomy, this episode is the cocoa butter to help those stretch marks not leave as much of a scar as we push beyond our democratic diaphragm and out the universal uteri of ideological warmth and comfort and out into the scary, cold reality of freedom and independence. Sure, Mama loves her little baby, but this baby's ready to walk already. Hell, drive. This baby, the American working class, we can work. But we can't be represented in government. Now this baby, the American working class, it's gestated long enough in the dark comforts of democratic politics, and it's ready to push through for progress and emerge to birth itself. And this baby has a name, baby. The American Progressive Labor Party. And welcome to the podcast. The story of how the American worker has been subjugated by American corporate capitalist greed, it's fascinating. Time and again, the American worker has voted against their own best interests, allowing propaganda to infect reason, allowing divisive social issues to supersede our job security, bank accounts, and benefits. Why? Time and again, over and over, one of the political parties, one or the other, has lured the American worker away from their protections, their rights, and their unions. Time and again, with empty promises of an eventual payoff, the American worker has surrendered their own rights as human beings in our system. For what? An 80-inch flat-screen television? The American worker has traded the American dream of work hard, earn your pension, and retire. All for the thrill of holding up a line at a gas station, rubbing off their scratchies. The lottery, also known as the poverty tax, has usurped the simplistic goal of a decent home, no debt, and maybe a retirement RV with unrealistic expectations of getting to live like Jed Clampett. Now, how did this happen? Well, it's been a slow and gradual chipping away at the American workforce, slowly dumbing us down and force-feeding us garbage, literally and figuratively. The lottery is a great example. While the funds go to some good causes, of course they have to, the lotto is a poverty tax. Now imagine if someone saved that money, invested that money, they might not have to worry about scratchies, right? But we don't want those people owning a stake in our economy, do we? Well, the wealthy certainly don't. And we can go back to the Clampetts for why next season. They, the wealthy, elite, corporate America, our for sale to the highest bidder government, they've attacked our education, they've attacked our food, but just research the FDA's decision on sugar, corn, and how our government and corporate America lied to us about tobacco and, yes, alcohol, the war on drugs, racial and gender equity. American workers have been assaulted for decades without ever realizing it, in all sorts of ways. And it continues each and every day. The American worker says nothing about the lack of representation in Washington, or even their states. Pull up a list of the 435 members of Congress. You tell me which ones have a financial profile similar to yours. Anywhere close, leave it in the comments. Like we'll discuss in the next episode a little more, the American worker is easily blinded by these red herring issues that distract us from seeing our wages stagnate, our healthcare costs increase, while our hard-earned money gets funneled into exponentially expanding the profits of one company after another, the bonuses for one CEO after another, and funding the campaigns for candidates who will continue to sell us out. We create their products and then buy the products back from the company who paid us so little to make the product. Every meal we buy that we don't cook, every food item we don't grow ourselves, Every car, TV, download, the list goes on and on. The American worker bails out corporate America every day with every single purchase. And when a global pandemic came, who bailed out the American worker? Sure, stimulus checks and some policies were put into place to help stall the economic doom for some folks. But medical bills, lost wages, industry slowdowns, housing costs, auto loans, student loans, loans, all of our economy and our place in it was threatened by a virus. And people who wouldn't listen to medical advice. And people who just didn't care. And an administration more concerned with profit margins than human life. And a system that has stripped us of our prosperity and security for generations. Think about what all we put into our economy every single month. Then, when the world shuts down for weeks, few of us were prepared for the financial fallout. For all we pay into our economy, who had the working classes back when we needed it the most? I don't care if there are $1,000, $1,200 stimulus checks. You've been used, abused, and lied to your entire lives. Now, I assure you, this is not a fungus-induced third eye awakening thing. This is a provable and historical fact. But legit, I don't use fluoride toothpaste. The American worker has allowed every single thing we create, produce, and contribute to our own society to have a price tag, often one we can't even afford on the wages we're paid to create, produce, and contribute to the thing. Research healthcare in America. Look what transpired in the mid-20th century that made Americans just be okay with a for-profit healthcare system built on greed. What, you didn't know that America didn't always bankrupt people because they had heart surgery? Well, in our next episode, we're overthinking some of the big social issues that divides the working class and the cultism that leads us into these sheep pens. Everything in this country has been built on two principles, both condemning and damning our souls: greed and slavery. You wake up to that and let that drive your patriotism. Wake up to that and let that drive your vote. Wake up to that and realize that this discussion, up until now, it's been about the white American male adult worker. You see, America has its own shameful and embarrassing discussion for persons of color, women, immigrants, and children too. Yes. Because when America outlawed enslaving non-consensually immigrated Africans for a workforce, America turned to children. That had to be outlawed in the first quarter of the 20th century. Child labor. Let that sink in. Woodrow Wilson had to do it. Wilson, remember that guy? The wackadoo who felt God had anointed him to serve as president, and he did anything and everything he could to make sure he fulfilled that destiny because, not fulfilling that destiny would have meant his God was fake. But he ran as a conservative, took their money, and then as soon as he got elected, turned tail and whipped out a slew of progressive policies. They couldn't do anything about it. Remember that guy, Woodrow Wilson? He lied to the American people about going to war just to get reelected, right? The guy that started the Federal Reserve Act. Remember that guy? He was the one who had to pass legislation outlawing child labor. The plain and simple fact is this, and you can take this to apply to your individual boss if it fits, but I say this as an overall institutional statement. Your boss doesn't care about you. And his boss, I want to say his or her boss, but America. His boss doesn't like him. They simply don't care about you. Now, they care about what it would take to replace you. They care about what they might lose until they do replace you. But rest assured, unless you're the Steph Curry of your field, you are replaceable. You're a number. As one of my former bosses would repeatedly tell me about my department, the creative team that provided the product for him to sell and get rich off of. He would say that we were just expense line items. Basically, he only saw us as expenses, costs, nuisances he had to deduct from his profit. Well, no wonder he felt like I was overpaid at $32,000 a year. Bear in mind, this is the same guy who propositioned me for oral sex almost every day I worked there and fired me for voting for Obama. Maybe that's not the best example, or maybe it is. And that's another episode coming soon. The American worker has been forced to deal with whatever conditions or wages or benefits we're handed. We're told, just like that boss told me, good luck finding another job. Yeah. Which brings me to this. We surrender our unions because we are convinced they're corrupt, and our bosses threaten our livelihoods if we even think about organizing. The American worker has allowed right-to-work legislation to pass. Think about that. The one thing that we all feel like we need in a professional, working environment is what? Yes, realistic wages, but job security. And we surrendered that long ago in most states. Right to work means one thing. Your boss can fire you without cause for no reason, with no notice and no compensation. Now, what do we get out of it? The exact same privilege. The difference is if we quit a job with no notice, with no reason, we get blackballed. Your boss simply has a line waiting for your job. You are offered no similar guarantees or protections. Sure, we can file for unemployment benefits, but now that's just really an appeasement scam to keep folks from being homeless when capitalism fails us as individuals. Still, I'm not sure what your experience is, but where I'm from, if you take government benefits, it's looked down upon. Even if you've earned them and basically paid for them. You're ridiculed and called a freeloader and taking money you didn't earn. However, we have no problem with someone earning millions of dollars an hour. Listen to this carefully, then agree with me. There isn't a job on this planet or someone so individually valuable that they earn millions of dollars an hour. That's not a political viewpoint. That's simple logic and reason. Wealth hoarding exists, and you and I, the American worker, we're paying the interest. The American worker takes whatever they're given when it comes to jobs, conditions, pay, benefits. Take commission-only sales, or sales where the employee gets paid a small salary that then gets deducted or drawn from his or her commissions. Hope you hit your goal that month. It's predatory, but we the people allow that to happen. We allow these industries, which are often the highest profit margin, big ticket sales industries out there, to operate like a grand capitalistic pyramid scheme. The American worker just accepts that if they want to wait tables, they're only worth barely a quarter of the minimum wage. I'm a certified English teacher here. When did the definition of minimum change? You know, I'm a stickler for definitions. You mean there are workers in our workforce that earn less than the minimum wage? How is that possible? And I'm not talking about Dan's Diner down the road. I'm talking about Red Friggin' Lobster in every restaurant you walk into. And as Americans, because it doesn't happen anywhere else, we're expected to just supplement the restaurant owner's wage costs after already paying exorbitant markup on their food while still forking out an additional 20% if you're a decent human being. It's corporate welfare, just like we discussed in our previous episode, the morality of the minimum wage. Now, I'm not saying don't tip for good service. I'm saying America is supposed to be the land of milk and honey and opportunity of the dream, man. We should be so overflowing with abundance that the restaurant owners can pay livable wages. We can pay for the food and tip someone for incredible customer service. That money is out there. We have earned it. The American worker was given promises, and those promises were broken. The American worker has put in our time. We've earned it. Every time the American working class rises up to fight back, history has shown they're stomped down by both parties, by both ideologies, election after election. And we allow it to happen. We allow our jobs to be outsourced. We allow our jobs to be automated. We allow our jobs to be shipped overseas and our offices, factories, and opportunities to close. And when the American worker struggles with these changes, they call it welfare. They shame us for even thinking about a paradigm shift. They call it socialism when they take away our jobs and we can no longer pay for their stuff that we create, or used to. The American Democratic Socialist Party, yes, there is one, would be better served uniting the left fringes, the leftist fringes of America's left of fascist voters, and uniting progressives, rebranding themselves as the American Progressive Labor Party. I know what you're thinking. Now is not the time to split the Democrats. But friends, with Roe v. Wade being overturned, even if by the time you watch this, Congress codifies it into law, it shows a glaring failure of Democratic Party politics, just as we've shown throughout this season of Overthinking Everything thus far. I'm not talking about splitting the party. I'm suggesting we the people, the American working class, admit that most of us don't know as much as we probably should, and instead of following herds of failures, then let's unite and work toward common goals and understanding that both parties have failed the American working class. The Democrats, as they are, have a branding issue, just like Republicans after the January 6th insurrection. Every Republican here on out will be a member of the Party of Treason and Insurrection. Just like the Democrats, according to alt-right-leaning cultists, are the Party of Slavery, Racism, and the KKK. Just like we covered in the Party Crashers series earlier this season. The Democrats, over history, they haven't really rolled with the punches. Even today, this Democratic Party is a far stretch of that same Democratic Party from the mid-1800s, the National Democratic Party. So why is it the same name? If Applebee's was Hooters on the inside and you drove up to Applebee's, but you went in and it was Hooters, you'd go, what the heck is this? Well, that made about as much sense as not changing the Democratic name and the party identity and branding. Things like critical race theory, defund the police, and even democratic socialism. Those are failed ideas before we're even able to explain them because of the very verbiage. It's immediately off-putting, to the point that you have to apologetically explain the concepts to someone without their full acceptance of even hearing the idea. The idea is to win people over to compromise, right? Well, who compromises from the middle? So why are we pushing people farther and farther away from the middle before we even begin negotiating? You're saying race, politics, and socialism to people who immediately trigger to those words before they even process the idea. For some, challenging their ideas on race puts them on the defensive. Many have been so indoctrinated that police are somehow some elite class of human beings that are beyond reproach, like the military in America. So questioning cops goes against some people's foundational values, even if those values are completely misaligned, even if they may agree with our points. And socialism, just like communism, it gets a really unfair rap in this country. And I'm not saying it's a good or bad thing. I'm saying most people use those words and have no idea what those philosophies and complex concepts and theories even mean. Many decry communism as an abject failure. However, aren't several communist countries sort of powerful right now? Again, I am not saying communism is good. I'm saying most people aren't political science experts, but try to talk like they are. I'm not a political science expert. I'm just a guy who knows some things and can talk. Well, I'm also a guy whose name is brand. Get your brand on with Josh Brandon. Branding, marketing, that's kind of a thing I do and have done for years. So hear me out on this. Calling anything socialism in America after what America did to socialism, socialists, unions, and the working class in America, well, it's a misunderstood term, word, and a very complicated history. America's Labor Party in the late 19th and early 20th centuries was the American Socialist Party. Yeah, there was one. In fact, in other countries, labor parties exist. Now, I'm not a fan of a copy and paste solution. There are positives and negatives in these examples, but the fact that industrialized nations across the globe recognize what history has shown us. A country's working class needs to be organized and well represented in government. That government alone, especially under a capitalist economy, will not and cannot adequately protect or represent the average working class citizen. Thus, the power dynamic between the wealthy and the people will always be unbalanced. Now, that's not healthy for a society. In America's case, post-Reconstruction to now, we've seen the free market, capitalism, run amok, give way to a system that forsakes individual representation. Look, we don't elect our own president, and that's not a sore loser mentality to question the Electoral College, always. Sometimes it's an understanding of the history of the Electoral College and how antiquated it is. It's a teenager asking why they still have a toddler's bedtime. Look, we've grown up, and the Electoral College, in part, was constructed to offer some sort of consolation prize to the South for having such a huge population. Well, but hardly any of those population counting in an election or a census, or as people. I'll give you a minute to think about that. The thing about socialism is this: it doesn't work. It's failed wherever it's been applied. And communism, I mean, like I said, we hear that communism doesn't work, but China might argue otherwise. In fact, Russia might too, if we hadn't interfered in their trade deals and basically shut down their economy in the 70s and 80s. If you look at America's influence on Russia's economy during the Cold War, it's not all that hard to conclude that we certainly did defeat Russian communism to some degree. What we may never know what Russian communism could have been, because we couldn't stand for it existing, and we did everything in America's power to end it. But communism is an economic system, like socialism, like capitalism. Fascism is a political construct, like democracy, dictatorships, or a republic. And too often we confuse these lines because they blur so easily, constantly intermingling and intertwining. So when we say we stomped out Russian communism, what we really mean is we shut down their economic opportunities and choked their society into submission. I think good or bad, we didn't really defeat Russia in the Cold War. We just made life much, much harder for the average Russian citizen. It's far more complex than that, like I said. These systems intermingle. But take a look at some of the Russian sanctions over the Ukraine invasion, and you can see that sometimes the penalty for political misdeeds trickles down to the citizens. The other thing about socialism is we're already a party to it. America has been immersed in socialist ideals from the beginning. However, certainly in the last 100 years or so. Today, just as so many progressive Americans believe, we have socialism for the very wealthy and capitalism run amok for the rest of us. In other words, you and I, we pay into a system of socialism, but we don't get to draw out of it. Kind of like my generation in Social Security. Whether you're a Republican or Democrat, or one of the other independent parties struggling to find a voice in this system, if you work for a living, if you're a part of the American workforce, you're paying into socialism. You just aren't allowed to benefit from it. Whether you're a doctor, lawyer, plumber, one of those, forgotten essential workers, whatever you are. I'm not saying socialism is the way America should go, but I believe a shift to a more middle-class, centric system is the only way America can maintain a democracy moving forward. Here's the thing about admitting what we are and standing up for our piece of the pie. Despite the claims of some, America isn't capitalist, just like we aren't a Christian nation, just like we aren't a white country. these are aspects of an otherwise diverse set of systems. We are primarily capitalist, but we borrow from other philosophies because capitalism doesn't work in and of itself. In fact, American capitalism has failed on no fewer than 8 occasions since Reconstruction. Every time there's a bailout of the free market or the people, the system has failed. Plain and simple. So when we look at how to adapt and change with the times, embracing some of the things that used to be American ideals and progressing toward an amalgamation of different ideas that work, then maybe we would be best served exploring some proposals that are akin to democratic socialism of FDR's New Deal. If you think America is so weak that we would succumb to socialism, that makes me question your patriotism. I mean, maybe we are that weak. Sometimes we teeter too close to theocratic fascism for my tastes. But with America free market capitalism and actual patriotism that isn't nationalist, I might argue that American ideals are so strong that we could take what works about socialism and adapt it to our needs, Americanize it, and make it work. Taco Bell, Olive Garden it, just like we have throughout our history. And we just have to decide what's important to us. We have to educate ourselves on what this stuff means. We have to look beyond when someone says, they say free, but they're going to raise taxes to pay for it all. Why aren't your tax dollars paying your electric, water, sewer, and internet bills? Cars, electronics, furniture, basic necessities. I believe there's an abundance to provide for the needy and make a profit. There are some things that are foundations to our economy, and we should be able to make money off of. But when we privatize everything and surrender everything to the free market, well, then we complain about our utility costs skyrocketing and the slowed down speeds of the internet. And somehow we don't connect these back to greed. For years, we've been harping about get the money out of politics and term limits. These are foundational principles that I think most Americans could agree on. Except that we don't. We can't. Because issues like race, gender, LGBTQ rights, immigration, abortion, etc., ellipsis, they're all constantly revolving around our periphery, distracting us from the actual stuff Washington passes. Or worse lately, that these are the things Washington passes. This isn't an accident. This is a purposeful attempt at controlling our thoughts. It's Cold War era mind control science, not a conspiracy theory. I'm not big on conspiracy theories anymore because they went from fun with Bigfoot to Q confusion. But it's truly as simple as this. When an ad comes on for golden, crispy, salty McDonald's French fries, doesn't that make your mouth water? Mind control. You don't think people smarter than us get that and use it against us? It's in our faces every day. Every day we say something out loud, and then the pop-up ads all over our phones, our computers, everywhere. And we joke about it, we talk a little about it, but we don't ask, why am I not getting paid for this? This is data. You are data in America right now. And you pay into that system. So what do you get out of it? 20% discount on brake service? Shit! Now I'm going to get ads for brakes. You have a value in this economy that is so much more than your wages. You and your data are the gold mine for corporate America, and we've been sold up the river on that issue. I've got a whole separate episode about this coming up, but it applies here. The American working class has no representation in Washington. Sometimes we get a little more love from Democrats, but both parties have sold us out. Both parties have done the damage over many, many decades. In fact, just like most other issues, any progress or advancement made by the left is often appealed and then threatened by the sore-losing right if the right doesn't unwind it, all that progress, the minute they seize power. It's this constant tug. When will the American labor force stand up and band together to form our own party. Because I can tell you right now, if you're tired of that left-right politics, if you're tired of constantly arguing back and forth over one social issue or another, and you're ready to make a real difference in your life and the lives of everyone around you and well, you might look at your fellow professionals and ask, hey, if there was a party in America that solely focused on the absolute best interests for the American workers' economics, all of us, regardless of their political lean or specific industry, race, gender, religion, whatever, would you be on board? At best, you might find common ground among your fellow professionals. At worst, they tell you why they couldn't support the idea. We know their priorities, and then we can spend our time uniting people with values. And guess what? If you're not able to work or you're not working, you're still included. Because the American Progressive Labor Party would be a party that is open to all who share our common goal for prosperity and restored opportunity for the working class. Democrats too, conservative Democrats, moderates, or centrist Democrats, as they like to call themselves, you'd be welcome too, with an understanding that we welcome you in as a failed ideology that we're absorbing. And just like all the other conservative traditionalists too afraid or corrupt to change, the time is now to get with the program. I know that sounds harsh, but Democrats, Americans, are tired of losing. We're unlikely to ever be able to compromise with everyone. But I assure you that if you're working in America and making less than, say, $250,000 a year, you can't afford to even be a Republican. I'd argue you're selling out your prosperity for whatever your conservative ideals are at that point. I'm no fan of either party. I lean way left these days because I leaned so far right for much of my ignorant, uneducated youth. America's workforce, the labor force, needs its own party in this country. America's already clamoring desperately for more than a two-party system. We've already learned this season that the two-party system is a fallacy, and America's had more than two parties, more parties than we can even keep up with, and the powerful elite have forced us all into an either-or pen of right-wing cult of personality or left-wing centrist vote blue no matter who we decide the candidate should be or what their true ideals are. Just vote for us, not them. Oh. We already know who the folks on the far right extreme are. They wear the hats, conspiracy theories, bigotry, divisiveness, hateful rallies, misinformation, willful ignorance, and a narcissistic sociopathy that should concern us all. We're unlikely to appeal to them. They don't vote with their minds. But we can save some from that cult and win them over if we're organized and have a solid platform everyone can agree on. For the rest of us, we deserve a seat at the table, and it's time we take it. Maybe the next time you see a protest and shrug it off because it doesn't impact you, maybe research a little about the ways that it does, because I promise you, it does. And while I don't personally support the idea of rioting, understand that riots don't just happen out of nowhere. There's always a catalyst, like a food fight in the cafeteria at school. And just like a heated exchange with your spouse or partner, voices get raised when one party doesn't feel heard or acknowledged or represented. Sometimes, unfortunately, it takes a nasty physical turn. Yes, we can have the discussion about the agitated party's anger issues, but we aren't addressing the issue at all if we don't address the things that led up to the outburst as well. Americans today are far more interested in condemning one party as abusive, and sometimes that's the case. I assure you from personal experience and beyond, it's often sparked by another form of abuse: verbal, emotional, mental. Johnny Depp and Amber Heard. One party might be the toxic catalyst, but to suggest that both parties didn't devolve to some levels of toxicity is ridiculous to assert. Toxicity is a contagious cancer. It spreads. And riots stem from similar origins. One party feels oppressed, the oppressor doesn't listen. The oppressed gets louder, the oppressor tries to shut them up. The oppressed, at some point, has to make a decision when all that happens. We haven't listened, America. We have done a very poor job of listening, America. And that's why some folks feel the need to lash out. It isn't acceptable. It isn't healthy. Sometimes it's necessary. History shows us that. But if we cared enough to learn from history, maybe we would listen. Because each and every one of these periods of history erupt because those protesters or rioters decide to just make a scene? No, they happen because the institution they protest against wouldn't hear them out, wouldn't acknowledge them at all, and in most cases dismissed them altogether. And even still worse, sometimes regarded the oppressed as the villain. Let's talk about villains in protest for a moment. Sometimes people with good intentions do questionable things. Sometimes people get carried away. Sometimes people lose their cool. But sometimes people who oppose the protest show up as protesters to cause chaos, to make the protesters look like the enemy. That's not conspiracy theory. That's history. That's military tactics. You hear this a lot with the Black Lives Matter protests as well as the January 6th insurrection, that the FBI, the CIA, the secret government shadow organizations, Antifa, Proud Boys, etc., all of these groups have been blamed. For BLM, many of those arrested had right-leaning ideologies, which, when someone says BLM protesters don't get arrested, well, you can clearly point and show them where those who broke the law and were caught were held accountable, and some of those weren't aligned with the cause. Now, what about the attempted kidnapping of Michigan's governor? Or even January 6th? It's hard to argue that everyone there wasn't a Donald Trump supporter, or at least aligns with the conservative right in America. It's not a convincing argument that the vocal people who did the things weren't manipulated and influenced by the president. Critical thinking goes a long way. It's why making blanket statements only serves really to divide us and conquer us. We're so busy saying Black Lives Matter, all lives matter, duck season, wabbit season, duck season, wabbit season. We didn't see Roe v. Wade being overturned right before our eyes. But it's more than Roe. It's Miranda rights, it's voting rights, gerrymandering, gun laws, separation of church and state, and so many other principles we've let slide by because we weren't paying attention. We just didn't care. Because Democrats lose so much, even when they win, it's a win that should have come so long ago, or it's a win of something they won back because they lost it to the Republicans. Americans are tired of losing. We're tired of the oppression, and we're tired of not being heard. I've said it before, and I'll say it again. Maybe if we would have listened when Cap took the knee, maybe we wouldn't be where we are today with racial tensions in America. If we had have listened sooner, George Floyd might be alive, Breonna Taylor might still be alive, so many others might still be alive if we had heard what Colin Kaepernick was trying to tell us, what so many have been trying to tell us, instead of having our indoctrinated feelings hurt when the mean black boy didn't do what he was told when the song came on. And don't look at me like that. You know that's what it was about. It's why those same people got so angry every time Obama gave a speech, so mad at that tan suit, the one God gave him. My question to the American workforce is this: what is important enough to you, your financial prosperity, the payoff for the hard work you do day in and day out? What is important enough for you to take a knee, or to take a stand for that matter? At what point will you stand up and say enough? Do you need to learn more about why you should? Then go back, watch this again, and then another time, as many times as you need to. Then click the links, read more. The American Labor Party, the American Progressive Labor Party, a place for Republicans, Democrats, Democratic Socialists, conservatives, liberals, libertarians, Greens, and everyone in between. A place for men, women, the white people, the black community, the Latinx community, the Asian community, the indigenous peoples of this country, the LGBTQ community, different religions and beliefs. Everyone. Because while we may all have our own niches and labels, we are all the American working class, and representation matters. We, the American worker, need to realize this before it's too late, if it already isn't. The American working class needs to unite the left and offer an olive branch to the conservative centrist Democrats to join if they want to win. Ladies and gentlemen, the American Progressive Labor Party is ready for you to rise up and be counted. I'm Josh Brand, and I approve this message. Coming up, we're writing letters back and forth and living in each other's heads like pen pals. All the social media harassment back and forth hurting us into these either-or pens of picking sides. In our next episode, Pen Pals, we discuss American cultism further, delving deep into some of our most controversial social issues, from race, guns, immigration, abortion, marriage equality, civil rights, and more, in an effort to uncover the origins of these divisive issues that never seem to ever get resolved. After that, we're going to discuss how we're selling our souls as a result of picking these ideological issue hills to die on, as I deconstruct a culture of cultism. Please like, share, and subscribe. Do all the things I need you to do. Get the word out there and make Overthinking Everything a top podcast. Tell everyone you know about us. And if you enjoyed this episode, please hit me up on Cash App with some love. Full disclosure, these aren't campaign funds, just paying bills. Thanks for joining me. I'm Josh Brandon, and I'm overthinking everything. Remember, an apple a day keeps fascists away.